Hi everyone, welcome to our weekly webinar. Salomon and I are here today to talk with you about the general context for the symposia that we have coming up. We're interested in providing an overview of the future of the workforce, how that relates to employers' needs, how the makerspaces can empower students, and ultimately how the internships become the link between the makerspace and the employers and enable the students to move through and become empowered to achieve successful careers through making.
Hello everyone, especially since everyone's getting started with their current apprenticeship program, this is timely to kind of step back and realize where this is all leading to. So eager to talk a little bit about this.
Yeah. So just a couple of important dates before we get started. These are pretty time sensitive, so I wanted to just reiterate this. The International Symposium on Academic Makerspaces is coming up in early August at Stanford. We are encouraging colleges to submit abstracts and posters and videos. If you notice here on the sheet, the abstracts are due on April the 9th, which is only a month away. We would very much like to help college teams that are interested in putting together a proposal or work for submission. So please let us know as soon as possible if you intend to do that. Also, the registration is an early bird special, and the great news is it's a $100 registration for students, and because it's in Stanford this time instead of Cleveland, it's a lot closer, and it'll be great, a great experience for both your faculty and your students to attend. And just another couple of reminders, during March we'll be working on our Kumu maps for a statewide meta map, and so if you have a chance, please update your Kumu maps, and if you need help with that, please let us know once again. Next Friday, if you're in Sacramento for CCC AOE, Salomon and I will be presenting a workshop on the relationship between makerspaces and guided pathways. So come along to that if you're available. We'll also share the slide deck on that presentation on Workplace and on the website. So if you miss it, you can catch up on it then. Another reminder, CCC Maker has reserved a booth at the Bay Area Maker Fair, and we're very interested in talking to colleges that would like to send student teams and would like to present their work in a shared environment. We're also interested in having K-12 and other colleges that you're working with be invited to the Maker Fair and to coordinate some of the materials and resources that we're producing with those colleges and with your teams. And finally, the Maker Ed convention, it will be held in San Jose in October. So it's a little later in the year, but we'll also be doing proposals for presentations there. So there's a lot of opportunities for professional and development for your teams, and there's a lot of opportunities for people to go out and tell your story. So there we go. So we've also added a couple more days to the schedule for your mid-year reviews. So go online and grab a time slot. We've added another 8 hours. So if you need something soon, please just jump in and grab one of those slots. And remember, our goal is to help everyone to just have a look at where you are in the year, and to look at how your work plans are evolving and whether you need to adjust those, move some of your objectives around, maybe do a budget transfer to help facilitate spending out your budget. Prepare for the carryover, which has certain limitations, and also to strategize how you're going to transition into your second year. We've had a couple of meetings with people, well, we've had more than a couple. We had quite a few meetings with colleges, but we're seeing some common issues arising, but we would like to discuss those within the context of your college. So please remember that the goal of this is to help you to make sure you spend out all your money so that you don't lose it, and to set you up for a successful completion of the first year and a good strong transition into the second year of the project. There's, prior to meeting with us, there's a webinar and a slide deck that has some graphics that will help you with figuring out a timeline and some of the ways that you can prepare for our conversation to make it as productive as possible.
And we promise to help everyone successfully finish year one, because year two is coming up around the corner.
Yeah, unbelievably fast. So. Okay, so this is, of course, the wonderful symposium we have coming up in Glendale on the 16th of March, and we'll be focusing on internships. I'm glad to see that Armin is on the call today, so let us know if there's anything you want to mention. Remember, this is an opportunity for you to visit Glendale Community College and see the great work that Armin is doing over there in empowering students through work in the makerspace and through internships. Salomon had a great experience with several of the GCC students at the Linked Learning Convention earlier, a couple of weeks ago. Do you want to mention that, Salomon?
Yes, this is we had a great preview over in Anaheim, it was, here in Southern California, with some of the great students that many of you will be meeting at Glendale. And they were quite articulate. They helped me out in the presentation for our statewide initiative. And when questions came to me about the students and the programs and what's being developed, I literally just turned it over to the students to talk about it. And the individuals from other colleges were just enamored of the composure and the articulated describing the way that students were learning in this new space. So I highly guarantee everyone to go and to hear from the students themselves. So I look forward to seeing everyone there on the 16th.
And we had a great conversation yesterday with 3 colleges that we're featuring with their internship plans. So we've got a really nice matrix that we're developing, looking at a lot of the different variables that different colleges are, experiencing, and identifying really strong responses that several of these colleges are already making to those particular elements. So the panel of we're calling them our network experts, our colleges, will be really useful for all of the colleges. You'll see some of the common issues that you have, and then others that might be more specific that may also relate to your college. So it's a real hands-on, practical advice for how to develop your system. We'll also have roundtable conversations in the afternoon addressing really specific nuts and bolts about how you're developing your internship plan. And we'll have a lot of opportunity for interaction between the colleges to really help solve problems using our collective experience. So it's a really valuable opportunity. We're going to make it a really intensive day's work, and which is one of the reasons that we're leading into this by spending today's webinar looking at the larger context of the workforce, employers' needs, and how students are empowered through the makerspace and the internships as a solution to these larger workforce problems. So I think with that, we will move on. So why are internships so essential to the CCC Maker initiative? Well, and remember that of the metrics that we're measuring on this project, the one single most important metric as far as the Chancellor's Office is concerned is that we meet our target of 800 internships developed through makerspaces using the skills and characteristics that the students are developing through working in the makerspaces, and how we're creating an avenue to employment through those internships. So that is our number one metric. We also acknowledge that it's one of the most challenging to achieve, but the focus on this is quite extraordinary. The amount of time that we're spending on this in helping colleges develop these internship programs is probably more than we're spending on the physical makerspaces at this point. Would you agree, Salomon?
Absolutely. And so, yeah, and we wanted to address a little bit of the bigger picture of why these are critical for your sustainability of your makerspace, to integrate them obviously in your programmatic aspects of your makerspace, and all these benefits that are compounded upon the work that you've established, beyond just the necessity of complying with the Chancellor's Office, which obviously we're intending to do, and hence why you've seen so much effort in that regard, yet leveraging the CCC Maker initiative to achieve bigger outcomes that go beyond just numeric output is something that I know Deborah and I wanted to talk about.
Yeah, and this is a conversation that we, in fact, Salomon and I were just talking about this earlier, that we can have with you as colleges and as representatives of your teams. It may not be a comfortable conversation for you to have with other people in your institution. So this conversation is something that obviously we can share, and these resources are available to share with your campus colleagues. And we're looking forward to talking with you about how to broach these subjects, or to really illustrate this context on a larger scale as the time comes. So ultimately, the CCC Maker internships and the CCC Maker initiative has this really explicit purpose and context. We're looking at rapid and major changes in the future of the workforce. We know that employers have very specific needs that the internships can afford them, and we know that the internships are enormously valuable to students. So let's look at why. If you think about the future of the workforce, it can basically come down to three massive and complex variables. We're looking at automation on an enormous scale, we're looking at the forces of globalization, and we're looking at major population shifts. So the first, and of course these are all interacting with each other, and there are different predicted outcomes to the dynamics of this interaction. And so one of the big issues we're dealing with is which of these eventualities will occur, and how do we prepare our students for that? So the major one, of course, is automation, and we're seeing accelerating technological change. With Moore's law, we're seeing this acceleration of technology. We're just starting to see how rapidly it's affecting the workforce with displacement and automation. And interestingly, very few people are aware of the degree to which their own occupation is being automated. So 94% of jobs, US jobs, are at risk of automation, but 90% of people think that other people's jobs are at risk of automation, but not their own, which is a real challenge. We're also seeing conditions where significant portions of people's individual job is being automated, which means that with productivity, say if it's 20% of your job is automated, that means that it only takes 4 people to do the job that 5 people previously did. So that's a downward pressure on employment as well. The other thing we're having is that jobs are disappearing rapidly. They're saying, a study came out of Oxford that said that 47% of jobs won't exist within the next generation. And the new jobs that are emerging aren't yet predicted. We still don't have a very clear idea of where those jobs might exist even a few years from now. So we're looking at a really big unknown future that we are preparing our students for.
And this goes across multiple even salary scales, from highly technical individuals, like in my own previous profession of drafter and engineer, those merging together now where multiple CAD and CAM operations can really almost occupy three individuals if you want to include the manufacturing. As well as even in agricultural, it takes even less and less people to automate agricultural jobs, and you can imagine how this is impacting at every scale of salaries across multiple work.
Mm. So yeah, we are seeing it in the professional realms, and in a way, we're sort of blind to it sometimes within our own profession, and especially in education too, because there's there's tenure for faculty, etc. So there is a sense of job security that doesn't exist in other occupations. But yeah, we're seeing it everywhere, from the law profession to medicine, and all the way down to unskilled labour as well. So this change is really dramatic, and it's only just really starting to reach that critical mass. And part of this reason is that we're looking at a general purpose technology. And from what we know about the emergence of general purpose technologies in the past, namely the steam engine, electricity, the internal combustion engine, and now digital technologies, they're transformative. They work their way through an entire society very rapidly and very opportunistically once they pass a certain threshold. And we have well and truly hit that threshold at this point in our economy and in our society. They're emergent in the sense that we don't always know where they're going to come from or what effect they're going to have. And that makes the effect of these technologies really unpredictable. So a good example, obviously, is the ride-sharing platforms, Lyft and Uber. And even as they have only just started to get themselves organized with, how should we say, adequate controls and hiring practices, etc., and even as they are only just now displacing traditional taxi services and other public transportation, they are about to be displaced by the self-driving car. So all of the people who flocked to become Uber and Lyft drivers are very quickly about to become unemployed. So we're looking at this situation where the technology is outpacing the new growth development of jobs. We're also looking at a massive expansion of the gig economy. And while we tend to see this as often a positive development, which gives people freedom to work on a variety of different projects that enable them to work in different locations and creates more mobility, the reality, and there's a reference link here, the reality of the vast majority of the gig economy is that it is essentially outsourcing work at a much lower wage rate than the previous job paid. And this disproportionately affects women and minorities. So once again, the gig economy, which has been enabled by digital technologies, is actually exerting a downward pressure on wages. So this is also a serious concern. And then I'll defer to Salomon on the big data and artificial intelligence.
There's many of you have heard of the artificial intelligence sort of boogie jobs that are taking away folks' ability to work within current functions. But this is the benefit, that the data that we're producing is being leveraged so that we can perform better at the jobs that do exist. So better informed decision making across multiple sectors, reaching efficiency levels that, once again, will remove individuals of the pipeline, because those few that do maintain the jobs at that relative scale will be that much more efficient. So it's not anything that's going to replace, but just prevent other folks within the pipeline of data and using the data to improve efficiency is really what this is causing. And just to give a real tangible example, Deborah has the steam engine, I believe, there in electricity. Well, a lot of companies had steam engines at their location before the network of electrifying the whole grid happened. then the need of steam engines was no longer necessary at the local companies. The same thing is happening with cloud computing. A lot of data centers that employ a lot of IT professionals at various companies, well, all that's going to the cloud. And similar to the steam engine electrification of companies, the cloud is doing the same thing to data centers and computers at almost at every level, and eventually your home, which already has, because many of you probably use your phone as your main computer than your actual PC or Mac at home. So things are changing, and I think that's just the shift. But as I mentioned to Deborah in preparation for this, I don't think anyone has ever thought about the unemployed typewriter technicians, because what happens, individuals have to just find new skill sets to transition into this new reality of work.
Hmm. So in response to these forces, globalization particularly, Tony Wagner has determined that there's 7, and he calls them survival skills, and these overlap with a lot of the 21st century skills that we talk about in our educational paradigm. But I thought it's really interesting that he identifies as the #1 skill that people need to be successful is curiosity and imagination. And I would argue that it's because of this rapid, extreme changes that we're seeing that it requires that kind of flexibility and imagination and big thinking to be able to grasp what's going on and to see one's way into it as a successful venture. And this is a really powerful skill for students to develop so that they're willing to tackle these challenges. So the initiative in entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial mindset of seeing opportunities and taking advantage of them, that doesn't necessarily mean starting your own business, but it means having that that willingness to jump in and take that risk and go for it. We know about critical thinking and problem solving, but information literacy, of course, is a huge component. I'm glad to see Maura's here. Shout out to Maura. Obviously, this is something that you would be very on top of. And then, of course, resilience is a key element of this too, because we're going to see people displaced regularly, and they're going to need to be agile to be able to quickly adapt to new circumstances, to move into new industries, and to be physically, geographically mobile as well as culturally mobile as they move and negotiate this larger globalized environment. Once again, effective oral and written communication, this comes up time and time again. And then finally, this collaboration across networks and leading by influence. This is a key component as well. And this is something, of course, that is somewhat embedded in our CCC Maker initiative, that we are working to build a network that can then influence the larger context.
I just wanted to add, Deborah, that Tony Wagner in that same book brings up a couple of good points for teachers to think about, because I think that's the book's audience primarily, and that's essentially our students. So that he's asking this of teachers: are students selectively challenging authority as part of the course of their education? Are the approaches to the courses from the learned versus from the knower? So in other words, are the courses shaping the individual versus a content dump, essentially? And so he brings up a couple of good points in that book. So I recommend that to anyone to read about it, because it really gives a good framework for design thinking and makerspace activities.
And then another resource to consider is the work of Bronofson and McAfee. Salomon and I read several books by these guys about, I don't know, 7 years ago when we were starting out with this work, and it's been remarkable the degree to which the predictions that were made have truly played out. You know, they're talking about Moore's law in the second half of the chessboard, where change becomes exponential, and we're really seeing that now. Their greatest concern is that the gap, because traditionally people have adapted to the new occupations that have developed as technology has changed, and that there's been a fairly seamless redistribution of the workforce into these new occupations. Their big concern is that the old occupations are going to drop away so quickly, and the new occupations are going to be more highly skilled and require fewer people. And so what we'll end up with is a real massive block of technological unemployment. And we've seen that to some degree already starting in the flattening of wages, so that even though we're at virtually full employment at this point in our economy, we're still seeing wages stagnate, and that's because we've got this discrepancy playing out where the new jobs are only really just starting to emerge, and people are still working in the old jobs, but there's no upward pressure on wages. So and that's where we end up with this economic issue, that when there does become this greater push for wage growth, that in turn pushes employers and the workforce and capital towards automation. So we end up in this bind.
As I believe what they call the third industrial revolution that we're currently undertaking, fueled by, again, the technology of big data and information, they do credit, I believe, the organizational innovation and skill development to be critical to solving successful economies of the 21st century. So I think this is why the makerspace movement is so critical, because it is a different way of organizing learning and connections with people. Yeah.
So the skills gap is a very real concern, and the educational transformation that can address these issues is very much integrated into the Maker initiative. So these are the links to the resources that I was using, particularly the McKinsey Global Themes. The third one is a really extensive study and looks at these issues from a global perspective. So very, very interesting. And I've also added, and you'll see it on each of the resource slides, Doing What Matters has created a data publication page that has a lot of research and other pieces, essays, articles, etc., research papers on these topics. So I recommend that you have a look at that as well. So when we look at this same issue from the employer's point of view, we're seeing, and you know, we all know, we've all heard about the middle skills gap, and we know that this is already playing out in California with approximately the potential for 1 million jobs that will require filling with middle skills trained people. And I don't know, Salomon, if you want to jump into that for a moment.
Yeah, this is the potential, for those of you who learn about the Strong Workforce Program and its bill originally proposed, this was the 1 million middle skill jobs that are being addressed by this particular funding, for which even the CCC Maker is also inclusive in that structure of addressing this future job growth. And that's the idea that California, in order to sustain its not only population growth, but also this shift in economy of increasing middle skills jobs, and that's primarily through our community college system, is why you see a lot of this investment currently happening in our state. Is really we're trying to prevent what if we sustain this level of educational levels and outputs within our institutions, we're not going to hit certain metrics, you know, within the foreseeable future to garnish the taxes and, of course, the maintaining the standard of living that we're all enjoying here in our state, et cetera. And so there's a lot of long-term implications of why the investment is happening right now for these potential jobs that we're all hoping to fill.
All right. And I'll talk more about the perception gap in just a second. There's several other major pressures on employers at the moment, and one is the cost of labor. So this is where internships become really important. When employers are investing in employer training, on-the-job training, etc., that is a significant outlay for them. Obviously, they want candidates for the jobs that are going to be successful in an environment where they can then learn the skills of that particular environment. And in fact, many larger companies are now have their own internal career planning systems so that they can develop their talent from within. So some of the work that we are currently doing in preparing our students for a successful entry into the workforce is now also being shouldered by many employers as they continue training and offer these career services to their own employees. So it's a significant investment. And the reason they're doing this is that the cost of a failed search or a failed hire in a particular position mounts into the tens of thousands of dollars. I've seen one reference where they said the cost of filling a job, having an unsuccessful employee, and then dismissing them from the job can cost up to $50,000. So you're looking at it really important, a significant expense that employers want to avoid. And remember that anything that increases the cost of labor for an employer is going to once again push them more towards automation or other solutions to the problem. So we're trying to work with the employers, if you think about it, to transition our students into a system where they are going to get that lifelong learning and additional training once they're in the job. The other thing is, because the US is a developed economy, most of the growth that we can achieve at this point is through productivity, and that comes through technology. Fortunately, we're seeing some changes in globalization where differential pay rates are starting to pull some jobs back into the United States, but those jobs that are being reshored are not at the same low skill levels that they used to be. They all require some degree of middle skills and technical skills, as well as the 21st century skills that we've talked about. So those are three main issues for employers. Back to this question about the perception gap, and this is another reason why sorry, I'm just moving some screens around here. This is another reason why it's so important that our students experience internships. We see a really major discrepancy between what students think of their own preparedness to enter the workforce and what employers see when the students come and enter their workplace. This study is through the National Association of Colleges and Employers, and it's been a really, this is actually the second time that this study has been done. There was another study back in 2015, saw exactly the same issues. So if you look at these figures, you can see that one of the single most glaring issues is simply the basic fundamental professionalism and work ethic required for any position. So showing up on time, dressing appropriately, etc. These are the things that are fundamental to a student's success, even in getting a foot in the door. And we're seeing that twice as many students think that they're prepared versus the employer's perception.
And just to plug more for our internships, many of you who are developing your programs in very creative ways, which is amazing. Yet, if you recall during our conversations, I always bring up a point of employer evaluation. At some level, there has to be this external entity, employer, for which then provides the feedback to the student. You may want to include some of these items that are listed here in front of you. Many of you develop your own evaluations, but those are very important for the student to grow as they reflect upon what's being provided to them during that experience.
And if you go to this website, the link is there, you'll see that they have really clear definitions of exactly what these competencies mean. So you can use those definitions or a variation on them when you're communicating with employers. And one of the goals of this organization is to create a standardized language where everyone's sharing the same terminology. So, because of course that's one of the big issues we have, that as educators we have a particular specialized vocabulary and employers have their own. So this is seeking to address some a common conversation about mutually agreed competencies and skills. I would point out that the digital technology is the one area where employers believe that students have a greater competency than the students do themselves. And this, I think, addresses a really interesting issue that we have in career and technical education, which is that we have this idea that we need to be teaching students a really high level of competency within the technical field, often at the expense of the what we call 21st century skills or the workplace skills. And this clearly shows that employers are not necessarily looking for students with more technical skills. They're actually looking for students who can learn and who exhibit these other qualities. So, you know, I know Salomon has some views on that too.
Yeah, no, this is just interesting times that we need to realize what's critical for the students to be successful out there. And there's always when I think about this, I try to boil things down to kind of one-liners to help me remember some of this. This is very overwhelming, I hope. Well, I think for all of you it is for me. There's a quote I remember from a book that says, "It's not what you learn, but how you learn it." Mm-hmm. And so sometimes including some of these other competencies within your curriculum, yes, you may have to make room for it, and you won't be able to cover all the content that you're used to covering. And I've been in those discussions, as many of you will as well, that kind of go like this. Well, I covered 12 chapters, and where am I going to find time to cover all 12 chapters? Well, of course, once you start including project-based learning, makerspace activities, going to the sites of employers, presentations, et cetera, well, yeah, you're going to lack time that you otherwise would have had to cover all the chapters. Yet the benefit, I think, for inclusive of this other skill set is that you're going to have students that are going to go beyond those 12 chapters on their own time with their own intelligence. And that's the sort of the concept that I think is important to a lot of this, these new skill sets, yeah.
And you know, this is going to have implications for curriculum as well. So to the extent that we're focusing this webinar on the internship component, and in preparation for the symposium at Glendale, these same issues are relevant to our curriculum seminar or symposium that'll be in April up in Folsom Lake. So yeah, these are big and difficult and challenging questions to deal with, but you can see how the items that we talked about earlier in terms of changing the workforce is starting to manifest itself in these competencies that employers are looking for. And I draw your attention to the last one, which is the global and intercultural fluency. That's a reflection of an international globalized workforce, workflows, supply chains, business. All of it is ultimately at the point now where we need to be able to think about preparing our students to be successful in a truly, I don't know, a truly diverse environment. And it's one of the things that I've always loved about the community college potential, that we have the diversity already in our student population. We have so many of these skills and competencies already embedded in the culture of the community college, but often it's happening outside of the traditional program. So this is an interesting area for us. So these are a couple of the references that you can look at. The National Association of College Employers is the one that most of that work was taken from. There's some great references in there. There's also a really strong section on forms and resources supplied by numerous colleges. So if you're looking for internship evaluation forms, internship prep, there's a ton of resources at this website. So when we think about this, when it comes to the students, how are we preparing our students through making? Where is this continuum that's going to help us get the incoming student through the makerspace, through the internship, and ultimately into a career? And this is where we get to kind of more of the nuts and bolts, and this is the stuff that we'll be looking at more as we develop our internship systems. So first off, we can look at ways to develop early career exploration. And I don't know, Salomon, maybe you should jump in on this.
Yeah, no, this is very important, especially for those of you developing your makerspace, because this was one of the outcomes that I know Deborah and I were seeking to help. When we were designing our makerspace, we were looking purposely to address this one issue where we noticed in her architecture program and in my engineering CAD/CAM program, well, students started and either didn't finish or weren't prepared or didn't realize what it took to accomplish success in the respective programs. And they actually swapped between our programs, in midstream, and they had to start again, yet they had skill sets from the respective programs that they should have been advanced. So anyways, we saw that as a problem. And if students understood a bit more about the career and about work-based learning opportunities and processes within various industry sectors through making and work-based learning, that they would best choose a career path on the onset. And this is this whole gateway meta major concept that some of you may have heard from a guided pathway perspective, but it really helps to what the #1 claimed major is in our community colleges, and that's undeclared.
Yeah, and that's also, what is the most common grade? A W? Yeah, I mean, so these are problems that we face, that where students are, they're really unaware of what's available to them. And it's a really major issue because the way our programs are set up, you do literally have to go back to the beginning and start again. And we know that with student debt and with limited financial aid, that students just don't have the time to waste. Remember also, as we said earlier, things are changing so rapidly that if students don't finish their course of study quickly, by the time they reach the workforce, many of the technical skills that they've gained are going to be obsolete. And we've seen this happen time and time again, especially in the media industry. So I believe that getting students, and this also ties into delayed specialization, just-in-time learning. When you put those two things together, it becomes a much more efficient system for the student, and it also empowers them with a little bit more flexibility so that they don't have to make these huge decisions early on before they're really ready. And the makerspace is crucial for this because it gives that hands-on experience and allows students to develop that outlook and see the application of those skills in different careers and make decisions based on what their real interests and competencies are. So it's really powerful.
Yeah, I notice some of you are using non-credit, for example, as an option for introducing students to various careers and technologies. That way it doesn't impact their, obviously, their financial aid and their credit limits that many of them have. And so using that with your makerspace and work-based learning, it seems like a very good formula to do this kickstarting students within your college so that they choose with informed decisions, right? At the end, that's really what we want, the empowerment of students. And I know we'll get to that in a moment.
Yeah. So once again, authentic project-based learning, as Salomon had mentioned earlier, that it's more about the competencies that are developed rather than the content. It's what you can do with what you know, etc. So these are crucial. We know that we're looking at some pretty significant changes to our pedagogy and our culture by really trying to focus on these skills. But we know that these are the skills that are going to, and these are the characteristics of an educational experience that are going to make students more successful in the long run. So how do makerspaces, how does CCC Maker facilitate this? And what's the result? Well, we know that when students are engaged in making, in hands-on learning, applied learning, project-based learning, they develop confidence. And when that happens, they're going to develop a sense of purpose and agency where they can act on their own behalf. They're not passively accepting a pathway that's laid out to them through a traditional educational system. They can become much more adventurous, much more interdisciplinary, much more confident and able to recognize opportunities as they move through their education.
Yeah, most definitely. The students also enjoy the community that you're building. So the sense of belonging, as Deborah mentioned, is something that keeps on the engagement level high, and the intrinsic motivation, to use that fancy word, for students to continue the programs and to continue their courses, hence impacting their success rates.
And so, the resilience and adaptability that's created in a makerspace, where you're starting to think about each experiment as contributing to a longer term learning path and a lifelong learning path is really powerful for helping students really look at things, put things in perspective in both the short term, in terms of what skills they actually need to be successful, and the confidence that they need to apply for a job or an internship, etc. And then also for the long-term view of building on their career growth and fully expecting to have to change careers and maintain a skill and upskill where necessary. Yeah. So, and then of course there's also the entrepreneurial mindset, which may involve starting a micro business, micro enterprise, looking at interdisciplinary collaboration, and seeing opportunities as they appear. I just threw in this this graphic. This was something that we developed several years ago when we were working on our program at the Fab Lab at PCC. And it really shows how we could use a makerspace model to create this interaction and this flexible relationships between these separate aspects of making. So, for example, if design is at the center, there's also the fabricator and there's the person who's modeling. Often now, of course, this is the same person, but there's also the entrepreneurship component, which facilitates this design and brings the innovation in. And then there's also the business management side. And this, of course, can be applied to multiple different industries, and it all creates a feedback loop. Ultimately, what really pays off here is that a student that's been involved in making will have a common language and an understanding to talk to people from the other related disciplines and the other team members that they'll be working with when they come into a workplace. So seeing this as an interactive relational condition rather than a series of separate jobs or occupations is a powerful way of thinking about how the student can move with mobility across all of these different fields. And another example, and this one I shared with some counsellors a couple of weeks ago, if we think about a traditional craft-based activity, the tools for sewing, quilting, apparel design, etc., that you would find in a makerspace, there is already a number of emergent ideas that are happening around this. For example, to develop your own design for fabric, and then to have it custom printed, and literally be able to order it over the internet, and also have pattern making based on scans, have the pattern cut. All of those services are now available very easily to makers. That can also be the start of a micro enterprise, right? So, for example, repurposing fashion. That's an example on the lower left, which is it's an Etsy product. And then, of course, it also leads into these new technologies that are coming online, which is the idea of the transformation in retail, where you go into a store and you get a 3D body scan, you look at the different designs and apparel, you try something on in your size, and then it's manufactured and shipped to your home directly. So we're seeing that kind of transformation taking place in the retail industry. That's a significant, once again, a significant chunk of the workforce that is also about to see some major transformation. And if you take that logically to its next step, when we see that, as mentioned earlier, that differential pay increases are bringing jobs in industrial fabrics back into the United States, we're seeing that there is a huge shortage of people with sewing skills, but it's not the traditional sewing skills. It's also about working with software and hardware. So the automation that's now accompanying the reshoring of these jobs requires someone to go in with those skills, understanding how fabric works, understanding sewing and pattern making, etc., but then executing these skills on a much higher tech level at a much more automated and software-driven level. We're also seeing these new technologies emerging, so wearables with embedded technology and new composite materials. So all of this is really pushing and growing the opportunities for our students, and it's starting with something as humble as a simple sewing a straight seam. So that's something that these examples are happening everywhere. If we can have our students experience that through internships, it's really powerful.
Yes, interdisciplinary work is a good way of seeing the collaboration of multiple new jobs that are coming on board.
Mm. So this solar fabric, for example, was developed in a collaboration between a fashion designer and an engineer, as you can see in the lower right. So ultimately, the goal of all of this is student empowerment. And we know that we're offering these access to the tools and materials and the expertise that's going to enable students to make that step into a successful internship. And that's one of the reasons we want the internships to really grow out of the makerspace activities, and that the students have had some basic training and have completed a project and have a portfolio, and that's the process by which they're eligible for the internship. We also want to ensure that the students are adequately prepared to be successful in that internship. So, you know, learning and building on that confidence and developing those 21st century skills is a big part of it. And to reiterate, it's not just about the traditional 4 C's of communication, collaboration, etc. It's also really about building this confidence and resilience and a sense of direction and purpose in our students. And you know, access to these professional networks that they wouldn't otherwise be able to access. All right, and here's a couple of really great references or resources. Obviously, New World of Work is the existing curriculum from an initiative by the Chancellor's Office, where the 21st century skills can be used to prepare students for internships. There's also a great reference there on how to embed 21st century skills in curriculum design. Really powerful, because it's not talking just about what the skills are, but how you actually develop them within a curriculum. And then once again, the Doing What Matters data publications has some resources on this as well. So that's about it for us for today. Thank you very much for listening. And we're going to post this online, and please share this with your colleagues who will be attending the symposium in Glendale. And we would really like to hear your feedback and see you share what you've learned from these resources, or how you're able to adapt them or contribute to them in the future. So thank you very much.
I know we don't have much time, but if there's any questions, I'd be glad to answer anything.
Oh, there is something in the chat. Yeah. Okay. No, I think we're fine. Okay. Well, thanks very much, everyone. And a quick word to those who are attending. We will not be having a webinar next week, as we have a project team meeting. So thanks very much. Look forward to seeing you either at CCC AOE or at Glendale, or in our next webinar. Thank you very much.
Bye.